Gentlemen, nice to see you here. Last week, Blizzard mentioned in its first 9.0.5 changes regarding abilities and Covenant abilities as well, that legendary tuning would have come later on. And now we have some. We have some of the legendaries being touched. And as they said in their initial announcement, most of these legendary changes are regarding the underplayed and less popular legendaries, many of which are going to be very, very powerful. These were legendaries, some of them right below the, the playability state or the very popular state, which have received some changes which might make them very, very mainstream. But also, what is more important is to keep in mind that we have to start thinking in the prospect, in the point of view of possibly being able to use two legendaries at the same time. So what you were seeing before as a mediocre legendary being buffed to maybe being, kind of usable, now you also have to start thinking, what if we place it next to another one, combined, how more powerful it would be. Don't just discard all of these changes because you already know you have a best in slot legendary which does 3 times the damage of everything else, so it doesn't matter if Blizzard buffs others. It's good if others are being buffed because it's just going to be more possibilities, more options for your combination of legendaries to be used. So we are starting with the first one, which is Blood Death Knight. Blizzard takes this very literally with Blood Death Knight because they literally go and touch the 3 least used legendaries, basically. These 3 legendaries don't even break 1% in raid usage and barely 3% in Mythic Plus usage. And the changes overall all look very powerful, but simply because of how less used and how weak they were in the first place. Crimson Rune Weapon gets a significant change of instantly giving you 5 bone charges, so it does have an instant effect, which is very good. It's kind of what you want to see when you use a legendary effect, on top of increasing the cooldown reduction of Dancing Rune Weapon by 5 seconds. This is also particularly good on pull. It's particularly good in possibly, partially, fixing one of Blood DK's problems, which is what do I do when I have to go to a next pull in Mythic Plus and I have like 2 bone shield charges left or 3 and I have very little runic power. I'm made of paper. I have to literally engage the pull with a cooldown or more cooldowns just to be able to stay alive until I can generate enough resources to fend for myself as a tank. This is a good change for this legendary. Gorfin's Domination gets, at the very least, an extra addition. Before it was just the cooldown reduction of Vampiric Blood by 2 seconds with your R-Strike usage. Now, Vampiric Blood also generates 45 runic power over time. This is not as major as the Crimson Rune Weapon. And then you have Vampiric Aura, which before, and this is something Blizzard is changing for quite a few of these legendaries, these all use this ability which now is going to affect 2 or 3 party members. They are now also giving these legendaries some extra additional effect. In the case of Vampiric Aura, it's going to be 5% leech throughout the duration of Vampiric Blood and a 3-second longer duration. These are pretty decent changes for the last 2. What I am more interested in is for Crimson Rune Weapon. Crimson Rune Weapon already was the more popular legendary of the unpopular. Okay, we're still talking about the bottom of the barrel here. And of the least popular, Crimson Rune Weapon was definitely the best. And it is also the legendary which has received the more significant change. So it's going to be interesting to see this one in particular. Lastly, as a neutral legendary for Blood, they also got their haste of Pheromones back to what it was in the beta, 10%. It used to be lowered down to 7.5. This is more minor. It's really not used at all, this legendary. Now on to Demon Hunter. So Demon Hunter has gotten a change to Unbound Chaos. It's not quite what Unbound Chaos used to be in the beta, this abomination of AoE, but at the very least it got it damage doubled. From 300% damage extra of your Fel Rush after using Immolation Aura to 600%. Now the problem with this, as you know if you're playing Demon Hunter, is that Demon Hunter in that talent row, the talent row where Unbound Chaos is slotted, they have some pretty nice single target and AoE talents to choose from because they have Trail of Ruin and Grave Tempest. So they are very, very specific, either AoE or single target, and Unbound Chaos would have to beat at least one of them to become useful. So it's gonna be interesting to see. It doesn't look like, I don't think so. It's better. It's also more likely that Demon Hunter players are going to rather want to focus in one thing, single target or AoE, rather than trying to take a talent that kind of can do sort of both. So we just have to see the actual numbers, how it's gonna perform. The other more interesting, I guess, change is Burning Wound. Burning Wound was the replacement in the beta from one of the terrible legendaries for Demon Hunter. In this case, it was, I think, in replacement of Half Giant Empowerment. And I mentioned this, and I look back with nostalgia at several months ago when I pointed this out. What the fuck are these numbers? A dot or 5% of your attack power? It's ridiculous. It's pathetic. And it took Blizzard, I guess, a handful of months to realize this number was a little bit too low. So now this 5% dot is going to go up to 100% dot based on your attack power, which is a 20-time higher buff, which is major, which is massive. This can also work on both single target or AoE, because you can just tab target, spread your targeting of Demon's Bite to make this work on multiple targets, so it's also very good for that purpose. We have to see just the numbers, but certainly better than before. This was yet again, as per the plan of Blizzard, a completely dead legendary. Now onto a crucial change. Spirit of the Darkless Flame is now going to heal you for 100% of your initial damage over 100 days, I guess. Now onto the actual crucial change. Darkglare Boon has gone from a 20% chance to a 40% chance. So both High Beam and Fell Devastation now have a 40% chance to not incur in their cooldown, and now you're also getting some free Fury as well, 30 for Havoc and 50 for Vengeance. This is particularly powerful when you play with Demonic. This was basically the whole thing for Demon Hunters wanting to play with this legendary, because Demonic puts you into Metamorphosis when you use High Beam or Fell Devastation, and now you can do it multiple times, at least with twice as much of a chance that you had before. Also worth mentioning, again, Darkglare Boon is also one of the least played legendaries, like overall. There is basically no logs of Mythic Plus Demon Hunter players at high keys with this legendary, as well as of course in raiding and progression is just completely dead. So it's going to be interesting to see if this extra percentage chance is going to be enough for specs to pull this off in Mythic Plus, particularly again Vengeance and their Metamorphosis crucial part in the way they play compared to Havoc. Then we move on to Feral Druid. Feral Druid has not gotten, we can say, too much, just a couple of changes to Frenzy Band and Katai Curio. Katai Curio went from 25% of their energy to 35% of the energy cost discount on your clear cast, and then you have Frenzy Band giving you 50% more from 0.2 to 0.3 second cooldown reduction at your Berserk when you use combo point generating abilities, as well as the bleeds you leave on the targets doing 150% of their damage over 8 seconds compared to 100 from before. Once again, of course, to no surprise, both of the legendaries are pretty dead, so it's probably going to take a little bit more for these to become very powerful, but I will remind you, again, you will hear this quite a lot throughout this video, you also have to think about combining them with other legendaries, not just on their own. Now, some more better news for Restoration Druid as well. Restoration Druid already got, in the previous series of changes for 9.0.5, they got some extra spell power coefficient scaling on their Rejuvenation. Now, they're getting one on their Wild Growth. So when I mentioned that it was a good HPS buff, because basically Druids all they heal through with their HPS is going to be Rejuvenation and Wild Growth most of the time. So first, Reju got buffed, and now Wild Growth is getting buffed. Now we have also the legendary buff to Verdant Infusion. So this is particularly interesting because Verdant Infusion is already the second most used legendary in Mythic Plus. Yes, in raids it's a little bit less, it's barely 8% because the AIDS Rejuvenation playstyle of Vision of Unending Growth is working pretty well, but for Mythic Plus it is almost at 35%. So this is the first case we get of an already popular legendary being buffed. Not greatly, granted, it's just a couple of GCDs, a couple of extra seconds of duration of extension, but still, it's a buff to a, we can say, rather popular legendary. At the very least, in the more and the more popular activity in PvE for Restoration Druids, which is Mythic Plus, more so than raids. Now we have to take a step back and talk about Hunter, because Beast Mastery, oh my god. If I were a BM Hunter main, I would have probably, if I were a BM Hunter main, I would have probably taken my life long ago, but if I didn't, then I would have probably been pretty pissed at Blizzard, because all these legendaries have been made default super weak in the beta, and we have now gone several months, 3 to 4 changes of these legendaries getting buffed over time. So for example, Dire Command, which gives you a chance on your kill command to summon a Dire Beast, started at 10%, and 3 buffs later it went up to 35%. You have Flamewaker's Cobra Sting, which started at a whopping 10% chance to make your next kill command consume no focus when you cast Cobra Shot, and then it got buffed 4 times to go all the way up to 50% that we have now. You have Kapla, which started at reducing the cooldown of your kill command when you use Barbershot by 4 seconds. Now, Barbershot is going to do 10% increased damage, and applying Barbershot is now going to flat out reset the cooldown of kill command. And lastly, and more importantly, back to what I said about Restoration Druid, Rylak Stalker's Piercing Fangs. This is the second most popular legendary for BM Hunter and second strongest legendary for BM Hunter, even more so than Verdant Infusion, which was popular in Mythic Plus, but not as much in raids. When it comes to Rylak Stalker, is at 35 to 40% in both content, so it is definitely popular and powerful. And again, Rylak Stalker started out in the beta, being introduced, at 30% more critical damage from your pet during Bristle Wrath. It was immediately nerfed to 15% because reasons, I don't know, BM was shit compared to marksmanship in the beta, but still nerfed. And then from 15% it was buffed 3 times, up to the point that it is now 40% more critical damage of your pet. That's why I would be mad if I were a BM Hunter. All of these changes could have gone live in the beta 5 months ago, and instead it took us 5 months of BM Hunters being severely underpowered compared to marksmanship at the very least. Marksmanship, which still receives some buffs to their least popular legendaries. Again, at first glance, you're kind of wondering what is the point of buffing these when you have 2 very clear and defined legendaries for your single target and AoE use as a marksmanship hunter. You have Serpent Stalker's Trickery for your single target, and then you have Secrets of the Unblinking Vigil for AoE, which still nobody uses because Serpent Stalker's Trickery is just too strong. Again, remember the double legendary usage. Eagle Talon's True Focus is going to last an additional 5 seconds, that's the only addition it gets, and then Surging Shots is going from 25% extra damage on rapid fire to 35%. So not major, not incredible, still, considering the strength of the legendary they already have, it is still something, at least. Then we move on to Mage, because Mage has gotten some worrying changes, what I think it is. The first one is Arcane Harmony. At this point, there isn't much more to say about Arcane Harmony. It has been changed about 74 times from the beta. Now it's got buffed again. Each time your Arcane Missile hits, the damage of your next Arcane Barrage is going from 7% damage to 8, and it's going to stack up from 15 to 18 times. So slowly creeping up again, likely not to the abomination that it was before, when it could stack up infinitely, or even 100 times, but it's more effective at the very least than it is now, since Arcane Harmony right now is not very popular at all. Then let's jump ahead to Frost and leave Fire for last, because the changes to Frost are less crucial. Cold Front went from casting 60 Frostbolts to give you a Frozen Orb to casting 30. In the beta, when Blizzard said fuck you to Frost Mage, they put this at 90. So now it went to a more reasonable number. And then Freezing Winds. Now Frozen Orb is going to give you Fingers of Frost every 2 seconds and every 3. And then a couple of general changes which are also related to Frost, because both of these legendaries are actually pretty good for Frost Mage. Disciplinary Command and Expanded Potential. Expanded Potential has gotten its proc rate slightly increased from 1.66 times per minute to 2. And more importantly, Disciplinary Command, which is already something like the second best legendary for Frost in single target, went from 15% crit strike damage of all your spells to 20%. This could also be very powerful for Fire Mage in the prospect of being able to use 2 legendaries. When you use Combustion and you get guaranteed crits, this one can give you 20% more damage of those guaranteed crits. Now back to Fire, which I skipped. I left it for last because I'm a little bit worried. One of the legendary changes is Molten Skyfall, which is okay. 25 Fireballs or Pyroblast to cause a Meteor's proc, it's okay. It went down to 18, whatever. It's mostly for Mythic Plus anyways. The thing that worries me is Sun King's Blessing. I mentioned Sun King's Blessing being one of those very dangerous scaling legendaries to a spec which is already a very dangerous scaling spec in terms of power, and now it's getting buffed significantly. After consuming 8 hot streaks instead of 12, you are going to get a 6-second combustion instead of 5 the next time you hard cast a Pyroblast. Yeah, this is kind of worrying because you're getting into the realm with your scaling of being able to use combustion, proc a little bit more actually than 8 hot streaks in a row, and then as your combustion is over you can Pyroblast and enter another 6 seconds of combustion. 6 seconds of combustion, which is going to allow you to get another at least 4 to 5 hot streaks again, which makes you only 3 hot streaks away to be able to get a hard cast Pyroblast to put you into 6 seconds of combustion again, and then 15 seconds later your actual combustion is off cooldown again. it's kind of worrying because of the double legendary usage, together with Favored Incantation, which you already have. I'm not sure about this one. I think it's a little bit worrying in terms of scaling. Because, you know, Fire Mage is very unstable, you know, no pun intended, it's very volatile when it comes to actually balancing it for the late game. So I just hope it's not going to be an absolute monster of an abomination, because I still remember the last year of BFA. I haven't forgotten. Now on to Monk. Decent changes. No, not to Mistweaver, I'm sorry. I'm just going to cut you off right there. The only thing they got changed is Clouded Focus as a legendary. Yes, of course, Blizzard has to buff the least powerful legendaries, so they have to aim for this one. But again, if your entire spec is weak, you should probably start thinking about powerful legendaries as well, because this one got its healing and mana discount increase from 15 to 20%. However, this is very bad because it's basically a near pure single target legendary, and Mistweaver monks don't need more single target. They have a very powerful, one of the strongest, consistent and continuous single target healing that you can pick from compared to other healers. So not very exciting. Brewmaster and Windwalker did get some good changes, decent changes. Mighty Power has gotten changed from Brewmaster. Before, you used to get 25% increased armor for 7 seconds once you use Slasher Brew. Now, you're going to gain 50% for 8 seconds. So literally, it is just a straight up buff. And also to Purifying Brew, which used to have a 25% chance to not consume a charge. Now it goes up to 35%. So the possible defensiveness of this legendary has been decently increased. Then again, literally no Brewmaster Monk right now is actually playing with a defensive legendary. They're all playing with a mix of both, because Keg Smash, the Storm Stout Last Keg legendary, can give you both the extra damage and the extra cooldown reduction of your brews. And even if they are choosing a different one, is Charred Passions, which is even more damage. And it is likely / possible that when you can use 2 legendaries at the same time, they're just going to pick them together for even more damage, rather than taking this one, which is purely for defense. The other interesting change is making a legendary that is even more unplayed than Mighty Power, which is Shauhao's Might. Before, you had this garbage effect, which gave your Tiger Palm just a 10% chance to deal extra damage and reduce the cooldown of your brews by 1 second. Now the chance, though, is at 40%, and the brew cooldown is going to be to 2 seconds. This would be able, depending on your rotation, to easily outpace the cooldown reduction, for example, of your Storm Stout Last Keg when it comes to brew cooldown reduction, now that it's at 2 seconds and your chance is at 40%. However, the damage is going to be mostly single target, and Tiger Palm is going to cost a lot of energy for you to use over time, so it is likely still not going to be as good as Last Keg, at the very least in Mythic Plus. In single target, in boss fights, it might even be, given that you're not losing out on the heavier AoE damage of your Keg Smash. The main change for Windwalker is just one, which is to Juan's Battle Gear, which basically gets kind of doubled in effectiveness. Before, Rising Sun Kick used to reduce the cooldown of Fist of Fury by 2.5 seconds when it crit. Now the cooldown reduction is 5 seconds. That's basically it. Moving on to Paladin, Holy has received 2, I guess, decent buffs to their underused legendaries, which are Inflorescence of the Sunwell and Shadowbreaker. Shadowbreaker for raid usage was already pretty decent. It went from a 6-second long buff to a 10-second long buff. This can give you a little bit of a longer window where you're not spending your Holy Power for your Light of Dawn, but maybe you want to spend it for your Word of Glory. Now you have 10 seconds of time to wait in between usages of Light of Dawn to be able to keep this buff up, and then Infusion of Light simply goes from a 20% effect increase to a 30% effect increase. It is, again, worth mentioning that pretty much none of these legendaries are used and popular, as expected, of course, by the MO of Blizzard with these changes of targeting the least popular legendaries. Then we go to Retribution, which gets a similar system. Retribution gets Vanguard's momentum buffed from 3% holy damage for 8 seconds to 4% for 10 seconds. So you go from a 9% at 3 stacks to a 12% at 3 stacks. This is one of those legendaries which can be good when paired with the second one, not on its own. On its own is just kind of too weak. On a combo, for example, obviously that the main one is Mad Paragon, which already buffs your Hammer of Wrath damage. You can pair it together with this one and gain even more effectiveness. But the more important and key change to Paladin is to protection, because they have gotten a very interesting change to a completely dead and never used legendary, which is the Ardent Protector Sanctum. Paladins are now scrambling to actually remember what this even is, because they don't even know if they have ever seen this. This was the one which used to reduce the damage reduction of Ardent Defender by an additional 10%, and then it also applied to a nearest ally within 15 yards. Again, another one of these applies to some members of your party type of deal. Now it has been changed. When Ardent Defender saves you from death, it restores 40% additional health, which is helpful, but not really great. The real part is this one. When Ardent Defender expires, without saving you from death, reduce its remaining cooldown to 60 seconds. This is pretty good because, as I mentioned, the whole deal when it comes to Mythic Plus is kiting, is having enough short, effective cooldowns to use pull after pull after pull, which is something that Paladins struggle to have. Actually, all specs outside Vengeance Demon Hunter struggle to have. This one, considering the fact that Ardent Defender already has a 2-minute cooldown and it gets reset to 60 seconds, and that you can also use this conduit to further reduce the cooldown, makes it much better for the meta you are in Mythic Plus. Now you do have a legitimate, reasonable 60-second cooldown ability that you can use every pull. Yes, it is still weaker than Vengeance Demon Hunter. Yes, it is still just 20% DR. Firebrand of a Demon Hunter is 40% DR. This one is not as effective, at the cost, though, we have to say, of a legendary. As I mentioned when I was talking about the possible legendary couples you could see from tanks, healers, and DPSers, one of the problems of Paladin is that they did have some quite good synergy with DPS legendaries that they could pair together, but they really had a scarcity of defensive ones. They didn't have some powerful defensive legendaries to use, which is kind of the case. Protection Paladin does have Bulwark of Righteous Fury for heavy damage increase, Holy Avengers Engraved Sigil for heavy damage increase, as well as defensiveness if they're playing with First Avenger, which is almost always in Mythic Plus. This legendary now allows them to have a much more streamlined and, I guess, safe path pull to pull in Mythic Plus, because they now have Ardent Defender up and available most of the time. It's, I guess, still not as good as Avengers Demon Hunters, but baby steps. At least it is something. At least you have a cooldown now up more often, which is always a good thing. What is not a good thing is the cuckshed of Holy Priest, because the simp of the healers continues being a simp, and now he's even bigger. Now he even has a tier 5 sub to the OnlyFans accounts of all the other healers, because Divine Hymn has been buffed. Now each heal increases all targets healing taken by 4% for 15 seconds. Before it used to be 10% for 8 seconds. The difference is that now this 4%, the tooltip is still wrong, is going to stack up to 5 times. So it's going to go up to 20% more healing taken. So again, bringing a Holy Priest into a raid is going to give you an external cooldown, which sole purpose is to let other healers heal for more. Yes, it's a buff, of course. It's still a stronger cooldown than it was before, but it is the disappointing and uninspiring way you want to give buffs to healers, making their externals stronger for other specs that have things like Tranquility. Then we go to Shadow Priest, which has gotten also some buffs. You have Painbreaker Psalm, which is the Shadow Word Death legendary, is going to give you now 30 Insanity from 20. The bigger change is to Shadow Flame Prism. Shadow Flame Prism has been changed quite a lot of times. It used to be a boring, default, sort of standard legendary in the beta, and then Blizzard said, no, let's get something spicier. So they concocted this entire thing about cleave damage on your Shadow Fiend, but it was a little bit too strong. You know, it scaled with 0.6 multiplier on your spell power, 400% spell power multiplier, 1.5 second cooldown on your Shadow Fiend, so it was nerfed heavily. And now, over time, we are now at the third buff of this legendary since then. Now the spell power coefficient has gone up from 140% to 225. Then we move over to Rogues, a little bit quick because they haven't gotten anything major or too major. You have got an Assassination, which has Doomblade going from 30% bleed, additional dot after you mutilate, to 45% bleed, and Duskwalker's Patch, the good old Legion legendary, again being buffed. In Legion it was nerfed because it was too strong, now it's getting buffed again because it's too weak. 1 second CD off of Vendetta every 50 energy is now every 30. This is actually now very good for your single target funneling as a Assassination Rogue. Outlaw gets some buffs to, unsurprisingly, their least used legendaries. None of this is going to, match up to Celerity. This is a case of fighting to see who gets the second slot of your Outlaw legendary. Greenskin's Wickers gets reverted. Again, another one of these revert changes to legendaries. The damage of your pistol shot increases from 200% to 300% whenever you proc the extra damage from between the eyes. And then Guile Charm. The flowing damage increase of Guile Charm is going to go up to 15% as a maximum, compared to 10 of before, or of right now in live. Subtlety basically gets a very, very minor change, which is to the Rotten. Now, when you activate Symbols of Death, your next ability, your next generator, whether it is Shadow Strike, Gloomblade or Backstab, is going to deal 50% increased damage instead of 30. This is a very poor legendary. And then I'm not even gonna say anything about Flagellation. I'm on strike about this piece of garbage. I'm not even gonna illustrate it to you. You're just gonna read it for yourself because this is now the 34th change in a month. I'm gonna take a guess and say it's still shit, okay? And then you can call me a prophet. For Shaman, we start with Elemental, and I'm just gonna give you the whole deal quickly. Basically, Blizzard is shifting away the power from Lava Burst to the rest of the toolkit. I suspect it is with the possibility in mind of the double legendary, because Shaman was bound to have a pretty disturbing synergy with deeply rooted elements and Windspeaker's Lava Resurgence, making you a machine gun Lava Burst demon. So the result is that now Earthshock, Earthquake, Chain Lightning are all getting buffed in damage at the cost of Lava Burst being nerfed by 10% for both Restoration and Elemental. The offset of buffing Earthquake by 70%, which is massive, is that now your Earthquake legendary, Echoes of Great Sundering, is getting nerfed from 175% additional damage to 100. So even in a cycle of buffs, Shaman wants to be the edgy, hipster, alternative guy who gets his legendaries nerfed. Great. Then you have Enhancement, which, as a complete twist, instead of getting its version of Lava Burst nerfed, it gets it buffed. Lava Lash goes from 54% of attack power to 75.6%. This is interesting more so because of the damage of Lava Lash right now, because of the possibility of double legendary combos tuned and focused around Lava Lash damage in the future. That might be interesting. The other change is to Stormkeeper. Stormkeeper loses the damage increase on Lightning Bolt for enhancement, and now it's just going to be on Chain Lightning, but the damage gets doubled. Instead of 150% more damage, it goes to 300% more damage. As for legendaries, for enhancement and restoration, enhancement gets, step by steps as well. Legacy of the Frost Witch damage is increased to 30% when it used to be 15. Far Cry from the 100% it used to have in the beta, but at least it's going up and not down. And then you have Restoration Shaman with Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. This is not too bad of a legendary already. It is, crushed by the Necrolord Shaman playing with Primal Tide Core and Riptide usage, but still, now the mana reduced after you pop down a Mana Tide Totem of your Healing Wave and Chain Heal goes from 25% to 40%. Then we have the last two classes. Warlock is going to be rather quick. In the shortest nerf known to mankind, Warlock gets its Malefic Rapture reverted. It was nerfed to 0.275 spell power multiplier, and now it's going back to 0.335, which is exactly what it had before. The legendaries, when it comes to Affliction, the buffed ones are going to be Malefic Wrath and Wrath of Consumption. Malefic Wrath is going to make your stacking Drain Soul or Shadow Ball damage from 25% for 8 seconds to 35% for 10 seconds. So at max stacks, you're going from 75% more damage on your next cast to 105% more damage. And then Wrath of Consumption is buffing your dots from 5% more dot damage for 20 seconds to 6% for 30 seconds, stacking up 5 times, so it goes from 25 to 30. This case, though, also the duration is more important, because this was the possible, thought of, good legendary for Mythic Plus, for an Affliction Warlock. The 20-second duration of the buff was kind of sketchy, because sometimes you just didn't have the time or the speed to kill mobs and enemies within 20 seconds of each other. Now, with a 30-second duration, it's going to make it much more feasible for you to use in Mythic Plus. In raids, of course, this is trash. Then we get a bunch of buffs to Demonology. Demonology, which doesn't even use, most of the time, its own spec legendaries. They all use Wilfred's Sigil, which is the neutral one, or Relic of Demonic Synergy, which is also the neutral one. At the very best, they are using Forces of the Orn Nightmare, of course. So these changes are going to be, again, one of these double legendary possibilities. The Burning Core is going to increase the damage of your next Demon Bolt from 8% to 15%, and the duration, again, is increasing from 15 to 20 seconds. Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling, which previously used to increase the damage of your next Dreadstalkers by 3% every time you spent Soul Shards with End of Gul'dan. Now it goes to 4%. And lastly, you have Implosive Potential, which, similarly to a series of other legendaries, gets a duration increase. Implosion grants 1% haste for 12 seconds instead of 8. Destruction only gets one legendary change, but it is a pretty important one, I'm gonna say. Yes, of course, not in the short term, because nobody's playing with this legendary, But it is interesting because this legendary is the one that increases your Chaos Bolt by 25% damage when you cast Chaos Bolt, as well as the cast time being reduced by 20 seconds. Now the problem with this legendary is that you simply don't have enough haste. You don't have enough haste to just keep spamming Chaos Bolts back to back to back to get this off on a 3-second duration. You kind of need to set up multiple backdrafts, multiple haste buffs, and some rolling in the background soul shard generation to make this work. Now, on a 4-second duration for your buffs, it's going to become more feasible. Again, not as feasible because you need players to actually equip this legendary to be able to use it, and there are none. But in the future, maybe when you have 2 legendaries and when you have a little bit more haste as a Destrolock, this might become much better thanks to this buff. So we are finishing now with Warrior. Warrior also gets some pretty cool changes. No, not Arms. Arms gets a buff to Battle Lord. The buff is the rage cost reduction of Mortar Strike, which goes from 12 to 15. The change to Slam. Battle Lord used to proc with Slam casts, and now it procs with Overpower. It's an interesting change because Slam and Overpower have almost the same amount of cast from an Arms Warrior. So it's kind of interesting as to why this has been changed. It might possibly be a nerf for AoE, where you don't use Overpower as much. I'm not sure what the thinking of Blizzard is here. And then the other 2 buffs are much more simple. Enduring Blow makes your Mortar Strike have a 25% chance to apply Colossus Smash instead of 15%. And then the duration of the Colossus Smash effect is going to go from 5 to 6 seconds. And then Exploiter gets doubled. Execute makes the target take 50% more damage from your next Mortar Strike instead of 25%, stacking up to 100 instead of 50. Fury Warriors get even less of an interesting pair of changes because Fury Warrior has been buffed more than Arms up to this point. Cadence of Fujeda, again with the time buffs, gets the increasing duration of the buff from 8 to 12 seconds. This just gives you more room for your Bloodthirst management to make sure you get to cast it and keep the buffs up, but it wasn't that difficult to begin with. Reckless Defense gets a scaling nerf, but I guess a quality of life buff, because before Rampage critical strikes had a 20% chance to reduce the cooldown of your Recklessness, which is the only thing you cared about with this legendary, by 3 seconds. Now, you just have a 20% chance every hit, so no longer about crits, but the cooldown reduction goes to 1 second. The reason why this is a nerf in scaling is because the more crit you had later into the expansion, the more this procced at a 3-second cooldown reduction rate. Now this is gone. Now it's going to have a 20% chance regardless. It's not going to count your crit value, and the price to pay for that is the cooldown reduction going to 1 second only. Lastly, again another time duration buff. Will of the Berserker, the crit chance increase from Recklessness expiring goes from 8-second duration to 12. This is a little bit more important of a buff because this is keeping up a stat buff for longer. It's not just giving you a longer buff where you have time to spend your charges of something. This is just a straight up longer crit chance for you for, in fact, 32% more time. The big changes, though, are to Protection Warrior. Yes, because Protection Warrior is dead in the water, they need some better changes. Now, we start with Reprisal. Again, Reprisal is one of those terrible legendaries which used to do something, you know, for your party. The first attack you intercept with Intervene grants you Ignore Pain and makes your next revenge cost no rage. Yes, but you actually needed to constantly intervene people in the middle of the pools in Mythic Plus, for example. It was just terrible to use, very annoying to actually work with. Now, it's much more simple. Charge and Intervene grant you Shield Block, Revenge, and generate 20 Rage. Very, very simple. This is one of the things that, for example, a Death Knight would want, like we mentioned at the start of this video about 6 hours ago, when we talked about the getting Bone Shield charges whenever you use Dancing Rune weapon. This is a warrior that can now charge into a pack with an instant shield block already pulled in, already gone for some more defense without having to use anything else. Of course, it's not something major. It's not like jumping in as a Vengeance Demon Hunter with things like entering immediately in Metamorphosis or similar things, but it is definitely helping. Now on to the other interesting change, Unbreakable Will. Yes, another one of the piece of shit legendaries which used to give something to your party. Now, the useless part about the party is still there. In fact, this is even better because it affects all of the party members. It's even one of the better ones on that end. The real good part is that Shield Wall now grants you 1 additional charge. That is pretty cool. Now you do have 2 charges of Shield Wall. Now, of course, Shield Wall is not going to be one of your 1-up every pool type of deal, like Vengeance Demon Hunter, or like now maybe Protection Paladins can do with Ardent Defender and their new legendary, but it can be certainly more usable. Yes, it's got a 4 fucking minute cooldown, it's very long. You do have ways with your legendary and conduits to reduce the cooldown of shield wall by quite a bit, and this additional charge is now going to make it even better. For the help regarding the damage of Protection Warrior, they also get a buff to Seismic Reverberation, which is a neutral warrior legendary. This is going to increase the damage of your Revenge if you hit 3 or more enemies by hitting a second time, not for 40% damage, but for 75%. Arms was at 80 already and Fury was at 100. Protection Warrior, the poor guy, was left at 40, and so they buffed it up to 75. It's going to be interesting to see, of course, for Warrior particularly, what can they do with the second shield wall charge, if it's even going to be feasible to use. So overall, these are all of the changes we've got up to now. So now we have gotten both parts of the intended changes. We've gotten the ones to abilities, to Covenant abilities, and some of the conduits, and now we've gotten the big chunk about legendaries. Of course, there's going to be some more tuning going on, some more changes left and right, so we will have to see eventually what Blizzard sets with. So to me, the winner of all of these changes, the one that has gotten the more impressive changes overall is probably going to be BM Hunter, mostly because of all of the legendaries being buffed together, having also very good synergy within each other, all circling around kill command, thinking about in prospect about being able to use 2 of them, as well as the buff to the Death Knight's Crimson Weapon legendary, followed up by the change to the Prot Paladin Ardent Protector Sanctum and their 1 minute cooldown of Ardent Defender. And of course, these last changes to Protection Warrior, which look very promising. So, let me know what you guys think. Take it easy, most of these changes are going to be possibly reworked and revisited by Blizzard over time before we get to the actual patch. So, I'm gonna leave you with this. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I'm so hungry.